Welcome to She is Resilient, a podcast for women on their healing journeys who are ready to start living their most authentic and empowered lives outside of survival mode. I'm your host, Tatiana, trauma and somatic therapist, as well as a holistic coach, and I'm on a mission to help more women heal their nervous systems. Each week, me and my guests are going to get real and vulnerable about the experiences that led us to becoming the empowered and resilient women we are today. You'll leave this podcast with the skills, knowledge, and inspiration to start creating the life you deserve. Because if another woman can do it, so can you. Welcome back to She is Resilient. Today we have Candace on the podcast. Candace, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. We are talking about narcissism, and I've been wanting to have this conversation on the podcast for such a long time. And like I was telling you off camera, I don't feel like I'm the expert in narcissism. I feel like I've had personal experiences with people who have narcissistic traits. And so as I was thinking about recording this episode, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna bring an expert in. And that's how I found you. So Candace, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Course. Hi, I'm Candace. Nice to meet everyone. I mean, I'm going to be talking to you today, and it's nice to meet you too, Tatiana. So when I look at myself and kind of what got me into this work, so I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for over 10 years at this point. It's crazy to kind of look at that and see where our careers take us. But I had always wanted to work with trauma. That was my focus, my goal in life. I was a junior in high school. I'm like, I'm going to be a trauma specialist, which is really weird. It's really weird to be at that age and be like, that is what my life goal is going to be.
It's not weird because I felt the same way.
I love that.
We all have something in common.
Yes, I love it. But as my life went on, I actually found myself in a relationship with an antagonist. I think one of the challenges that a lot of people who find themselves in those relationships is that it's hard to actually label it as narcissistic. When it comes out, there is so much self-doubt. There is so much am I the bad person? Because the way that you have to interact with somebody who is that way is almost the same exact way they're treating you. And you start to really question yourself. You start to question a lot of different parts of yourself. And it's really hard because, for myself, I didn't realize I was ready to leave until one of my friends was like, that's abuse. You need to go. And I was like, where am I going to go? What's going to happen here? And they're like, you could come home with us. So I left my person in Jamaica on our 5-year anniversary.
Oh my
like
God.
just full on, which was a crazy thing to do. But it got me into this piece of what is actually happening here. And I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know that narcissistic abuse was a thing. I didn't know anything about this until It's Not You by Romani Diversala came out. So there's a few leaders that we see kind of come out. Dr. Romani is a really big proponent of narcissistic abuse treatment. And so I went and I got certification through her. I'm currently also looking at other avenues too. So there's one with the Survivor Treatment Network as well, which is really interesting. And their focus is mostly on pathological love relationships. But it is important to note that the way that Dr. Romani focuses on things is more of a continuum of the relationship. So she talks about relationships with love, but also family and with work as
Mhm.
well. And so I started reading some of her stuff. I'm like, this was really resonating. And so I dove into it. I was not somebody that knew much about personality disorders at the first. And now I feel like I know so much about
Mhm.
it and how to manage it. And so
Wonderful.
that's a little bit of my story and like what brought me here.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure that we can kind of get into a little bit of your experience as we continue to talk. And
Yep.
but let's just start off by talking about what is narcissism? Like,
Hmm.
what is the definition of narcissism? And can we simplify the definition too so that we can really understand? Because I know that the
Hmm.
word narcissism and the word narcissist is thrown out all of the time, especially on social media. And so I really want to help the listeners understand, what does this even mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think maybe starting off with kind of what we actually, let's talk about like the history of where this all comes from too.
Yeah.
Like, where do we even see like narcissism bloom? Um, because it comes from really early on in our field.
Mhm.
Um, and it's coming from this actual, like, I don't know if it's Greek or Roman myth, one of the classical myths around this god who sees his reflection and falls in love with it. And so Narcissus was his name. So that's where we get narcissistic overall. And
Interesting.
so, and it's more of like a Freudian type of thing. So we have to give like a lot of credit to like psychodynamic in this respect of like their willingness to keep going through and understanding
Mhm.
NPD, basically. So there are a few definitions, and that's where it gets really confusing too. We have one definition, which is our boilerplate narcissistic personality disorder. And that is a part of the DSM-5. I think that we actually pulled it out, and you have it on your end, the like traits and everything that might be good for us to kind of go over so we can look at the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Hmm.
So, narcissistic personality disorder. So, it says it's a pervasive pattern of grandiosity
Hmm.
in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by five or more of the following. So the person needs to meet the criteria for five of the following. So, number one, has a grandiose sense of self-importance, so exaggerates achievements and talents. Number two, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love.
Hmm.
Number three, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions.
Yep.
Number four, requires excessive admiration.
Hmm.
Number five, has a sense of entitlement, so unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations.
Hmm.
Number six is interpersonally exploitive. So they might take advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. Number seven, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Number eight, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. Number
Hmm.
nine, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. Haughty? I don't know what haughty means.
So it means like blown up, right? Really hot-headed, basically.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay. So
Yeah.
the person needs to meet five of
Yeah.
those nine traits. Okay. So that is what narcissism is and how to identify if someone has a full-on personality disorder.
Hmm.
But someone can still have some of these traits and not have a personality disorder.
Yeah. A really good way that we kind of see that. And like a good example of this is, say, in substance use disorder, for example, the way that people need to obtain and like live that life of active addiction has nearly all of those traits. And so we see those traits come out in active addiction, but once the drug isn't there, once the substance is taken away, normally those traits are gone. Um, and we can see different ways that this comes out. Uh, but you're right in the fact of like, not everybody is going to reach like narcissistic personality disorder. And one of the biggest pieces of that is that piece for grandiose sense of self. That's the that's the challenge there because we might see different people who fit this type and can fit into this that maybe are what we might call communal narcissists, right? So there are people that want to seem like they're humble, but they still need people to like constantly tell them how good they are. They need like they fit those five pieces can come out. It's just that grandiosity isn't there.
Interesting. Okay, so that's the piece that I am really interested in. I mean, I'm interested in all of it, but I'm interested in more of the subtle traits that are
Mm-hmm.
harder to identify. So,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk to us a little bit about how people can identify if they're in a relationship or they have a parent or family members who may have these tendencies or traits, but they're more subtle. So it's like, how do you detect that?
Yeah. I think part of this is seeing it as a continuum, right? So one of the interesting things is our field is kind of split right now on personality disorders. In the DSM, which is what we use in America for diagnostics, we still have like what we call cluster B personality disorders. So this would be like borderline personality disorder, narcissism, and antisocial and histrionic. So we
Mhm.
have like kind of that cluster of things, but internationally, we're shifting away from that. So the codes that we get from the WHO or Health Organization no longer has those parts of it. We actually only identify personality disorder by mild, severe, or mild, moderate, and severe. So it starts chopping that up a little bit to where you start seeing that continuum that you're talking about here.
Interesting. Okay, so what would mild symptoms look like? Would it just be the same traits, but not as intense? Like how, can you give us examples of that?
So it would be like the number that they hit, right? So similar to depression, right? You hit a certain number of symptoms and then you go forward with like moderate or severe. And so we see that a little bit more, but also it's in terms of how it impacts their life, right? So you would see somebody with more mild where it maybe is impacting relationships or just jobs too, because we have to remember that jobs include a lot of relational aspects to them. So we see that like more mild piece, they might be able to like have family, keep a job, maintain daily life, but we might see them trying to be in higher ranking orders than they are, going for jobs that maybe they're not qualified for, trying to consistently get elected. That's also a consistent one that does go with the grandiose, but we do see that.
Mhm.
When we look at moderate, for example, it's impacting them a little bit more
Mhm.
in their lives. And then severe, we see that as like very impactful. That's where we might see more like psychopathic, pathological come into play, right? So a lot of the times when we're talking about this, we're not talking about the severe, we're talking about the mild and the moderate because they're not on the edges of society.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So
Mhm.
I love that you specialize in polyvagal theory and
Hmm.
you also use a nervous system lens and
Hmm.
um can you talk about narcissistic personality disorder? Or we're talking a lot about like the traits, because again,
Yes.
you had mentioned that not everybody is going to meet the full on criteria for a personality disorder.
Yes.
So, let's just talk about the traits from a nervous system lens,
Hmm.
because this podcast is all about the nervous system.
Love it.
What are your thoughts on where these traits stem from? Um, and how do they develop?
So that's a really interesting thing that a lot of people have been trying to figure out. Where do these things come from? Where do personalities disorders come from? And there is a lot of theory around that. One of the studies that I had just learned about is that they were looking at the number one piece for specifically like narcissistic personality disorder. And it was a self-report of trauma, right? So, number one thing that we put there is self-report of trauma. So, I think what it is like where we see someone who has like narcissistic personality disorder or traits of narcissism, we have to look at it with, say, the view of shame or the view of anxiety as well, and how that works, right? Where a normal person, something happens in their day where maybe they're not the best, for example, and somebody tells them that, their response is to be, okay, I can understand that. I'm sad. That doesn't feel good, right? So their nervous system like might still be in that window of tolerance, still in like the ventral vagal system too, where they're sad, they're not the happiest, but they can still reach out for support. They can do all of this. While somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder, when that small thing doesn't go their way, they get pushed into, say, a fight or flight response, so that sympathetic response, or even further, less common, honestly, to go into the dorsal vagal, which
Mhm.
is that freeze or fawn as well. So we see a lot of times that they go into what we call a shame rage spiral,
Mhm.
right? Something happens and there's a lot of shame that comes in, and then the rage comes in. And so we see where things don't go their way, they get through like, I'm thinking for myself where it was things I wasn't managing social situations in the way that my partner thought I should be. He wanted me to be managing everything I could possibly do. However, that wasn't a good reality in front of me. I When we would get out and I hadn't managed it in the way he had expected, then he would rage, right? There's that rage that comes through, that shame. Things are bad, rage to the person. Um, and what's hard when we're on the outside here is, how do we recognize that personality disorder? Because oftentimes when you're partnered with somebody, you don't want to think of them in a negative light.
Mhm.
You want to think the best of them. People who oftentimes get into those relationships can be very empathic. They want the best. They can see the change. They know it's out there. But there's three basic pieces that we can look at that are helpful outside of like the diagnostic criteria. The first one is that they must have an enduring pattern of maladaptive behavior. So this means like it's consistently coming back, right?
Mm.
In new and fun ways. For example, you might have one behavior over here and like there's just it's never going to stop.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not like a one-time only thing. It is a repetitive pattern. Okay.
Hmm. Yep.
Hmm.
So you see those maladaptive behaviors coming through over and over again.
Hmm.
And then there's inflexibility.
Mm.
And this is, I loved this term that Sandra Brown came out with, and it was the inability to sustain non-manipulative change.
Yes.
Hmm. Of like the ability for them to make any change that doesn't suit them is completely off the table.
Hmm. Hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then it's pervasive. So it means it's chronic. It's not in one area of their life during like a more intense part where maybe they were in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, for example.
Hmm.
Um, but you see it pop up
Hmm.
consistently. This
Hmm.
is where you might hear somebody say, all of my exes were crazy,
Mm.
right?
Interesting. So if someone were to say all of my exes are crazy,
Mm-hmm.
is that a red flag? And we shouldn't label them
No,
narcissistic immediately. And I think
no.
that's like what I really want as we
Mm-hmm.
continue to have this conversation. I really want the listeners to hold on to this, that not every relationship that didn't work out or not every unhealthy relationship means that your partner was a narcissist. And I think again that word is just thrown out so much that I really want us to understand what this means. But if someone were to say that, it's like, ooh, red flag. It doesn't immediately make them a narcissist, but it's something to kind of be cautious about.
Yeah, because what it signals for you, right? And these are some of those red flags of black and white thinking, right? You, at least I want a partner who is very able to live in the gray area, that can live in a black and like the black and white, it doesn't fit in with them. But when somebody's saying all of my exes were crazy, right? There is an inability for them to see the good qualities in past partners too, and see the reason that they chose them as partners in the past as well.
Hmm.
And that's the red flag that we should be thinking of. There's actually a good list that Dr. Ramani brings to us through It's Not You. Great book, by the way. Highly recommend. Uh, but the first thing is like need for narcissistic supply. So what that means is that in a narcissist's world, you're performing a role. Your role is giving them something. So, for example, my role was to make sure that my partner had relations and like relationships in general. So, it if I didn't fulfill that need, there was an issue.
Interesting. And is that role something that's kind of like explicitly said, like you have to do X, Y, Z for me? Or like how does it show up in just like a day to day? What's
It could look like an explicit ask, but more often than not, it comes in terms of like, well, you know, I like things that way, and they're going to make your life more difficult if you don't give them that need.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's red flag number one.
Yep. The next is egocentricity. So their focus is on themselves, right? They can't see other people. Um, Consistent inconsistency. So, right, they're not predictable.
Mhm.
That sometimes we look at that and we're like, oh, that's so much fun. And that should be a piece of like, no, that's not a good thing. Let's
Mhm.
not be inconsistent.
Right. Like you never know what to expect or what version you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you talk to them on the phone or when you interact with them, what version of them am I going to get today?
That I would call more shifting masks, which is a part of that. When I say consistent inconsistency, I mean you never know the rules. You don't know the rules you're walking into. You don't know what is expected of you. So have you ever seen, I get this all the time. There's like this show called The Game Changers on Dropout TV. It's like a college humor thing. And what they do is they have actors come in, and the whole point of the show is people don't know what the game is. So they come in and they have to figure out what the game is. And so that's a lot of what it's like with somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder is I don't know what the game is today. I don't know
Hmm.
what I'm getting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's resonating. It's hitting home. I hear
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's number four. That's red flag number
Mhm.
four.
Yep. Restlessness. So they're always looking for the next thing,
Hmm.
right? That's nothing is ever enough for
Hmm.
them. Uh, we've talked a little bit about this, but that delusional grandiosity,
Hmm.
but that can also show up subtly too. It
Hmm.
might show up in ways where it's not this big, massive, oh, I'm so wonderful, I'm so great, look at me type of thing. It can look at like, you have nobody else to help you, and I can do that for you.
Hmm.
I can protect you. Look at how great I am for that.
Interesting. Okay.
Hmm.
What is the difference between that
Hmm.
and someone who may be more in a fawn state, people-pleasing state?
Hmm. So somebody who is in a fawn state, it's not about them. It's not about how great they are. It's about, I don't know the rules, and I'm going to keep saying yes, right?
Hmm.
Somebody who's fawning is their nervous system isn't shut down, for example. Somebody who has delusional grandiosity, they're in safe and social place.
Interesting. So it's intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be the biggest difference with all of these, that they are intentional. They know exactly what they're doing. Is that correct or no?
Not all of the time. But they play by the same rule book. I don't know where they found the rule book, but they definitely found it. And it's pretty consistent across the board
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Um, we talked a little bit about that shifting masks as well,
Okay.
where they're one way in one place and one way in another.
Hmm.
That's a little bit more predictable.
Hmm.
That's not that inconsistency piece.
Hmm.
There's a sense of entitlement,
Hmm.
right? Things are about them
Hmm.
and they deserve certain things. If they get passed up for a promotion, it's the worst thing in the world because no, like they deserved that.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
They should have made that red light because they deserved to. It's a very small, minor one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say like if somebody, I mean, don't always get in the car with somebody who's going to run a red light, but that's not an automatic flag.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the next is overcompensating for insecurity.
Mm.
So if they're insecure about like their body, for example, they're going to the gym, they're working out, they're looking up things. They're so focused on how they're physically looking.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
If it's work, you see that come out as well, right? They are doing the best so they consistently grovel and do what they can and work overtime and put that above everybody else.
Interesting. Okay.
Mhm. Yep. Uh, this kind of goes with that shame rage spiral that we were talking about, and that's being thin-skinned. So small things just override reactions to them, right? They can't handle not being good. They can't handle be somebody else perceiving them outside of their version of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we have this inability to self-regulate. So we see that's where that shame rage spiral, like they're not able to regulate themselves when something happens.
Mm-hmm.
A need for dominance. So they want to have control of something.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always like control of everything, but for example, for me, it was I would have something hard happen and I was upset. So I'd go write in my journal and I'd come in the other, like in a little bit, and he's reading my journal to, make sure that I'm safe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that need for control. If I went on a walk, there would be a find my phone that came that comes up because he's trying to track where I am too.
And it's disguised as I just want to protect you. I want to keep you safe.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the subtle ones too, right? Especially if you're in a romantic relationship and you're like, oh, that's
Mhm.
so sweet. My partner wants to keep me safe and my partner wants to protect me. So what is the difference? Again, how can you detect, oh, this is a really nice gesture versus, no, this is controlling.
Because somebody who wants to know where you are can text you versus try to find your exact location. Uh, yeah, of like they can communicate and they can say, I'm worried for you. Would you be okay if I did X, Y, and Z?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
There is a piece of this that somebody who is not going, who is on that narcissistic spectrum of things, they are going to try to control what they can in
Yeah.
any way they can. And
Yeah.
that also includes post separation. And that's a common thing I don't think that we talk enough about. And it's very unique to this situation. So I want to get into that a little bit more later. Um,
Sure.
but just that need for dominance, then there's a lack of empathy. I want to be that they know what empathy is.
Mhm.
So there is one version of how we see empathy. And it's the literature on what empathy actually is very scant. We don't have a lot. So there's three different types. So we have cognitive empathy. That is knowing what somebody's feeling,
Mhm.
right? Being able to see it, somebody and be like, they're sad. You
Mhm.
put a list of faces up and you're like, oh, that's sadness. Oh, that's mad, right?
Right.
Um, People who are narcissistic have cognitive empathy. They know what somebody's feeling.
Mhm.
Um, the next is emotional empathy, and that is when you're able to feel what somebody else is feeling.
Mhm.
So it's not just that person's sad, it's I care about them and I want them to feel better, right? Like I'm feeling the sadness they're feeling. And
Mhm.
that's that co-regulation and that safe and social place that we have
Right.
and that we need as humans.
Right.
And then the third is what we would call like compassionate empathy, and that's being able to do something about it.
Mhm.
That's where, like, for my role as a therapist, I'm going to be compassionately empathic
Mhm.
because I'm there to help them through something.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
that makes a lot of sense. So they have the cognitive empathy, but maybe not the emotional empathy and the
compassionate.
compassionate empathy.
Yeah,
Interesting.
exactly.
I'm I keep thinking about as you talk about all of these different red flags, I keep going back to like where does narcissism stem from? And I keep thinking about, and I know that there's still research being done, and
Mhm.
I'm just thinking out loud, and none of what I'm saying is this is just like what
Yeah.
my thoughts, my internal dialogue, but I keep thinking about like, wow, narcissists, and you can tell me
Mhm.
because you know more about this topic than I do, but I'm thinking about how like people who are narcissists might be just completely disconnected from their bodies, completely disconnected from themselves.
So somebody might have a genetic marker, and maybe there is that thing that pushes their nervous system, and then that marker for the personality disorder turns on.
Yes.
That's where it might come in.
Okay. And then in you saying that, I'm thinking attachment. What about
Mhm.
attachment? I imagine that attachment plays a pretty significant role in whether you develop narcissism or not.
Actually, no. You'd be surprised. So, one of the things that we see is narcissism can come from a lot of more golden child type of things, where somebody is put on a pedestal, obviously. Um, More devastating, and you see a lot more of that shame and rage come out if they lose that spot, as well.
Interesting. Okay. All right. This is all making sense to me now.
Like once you have like the puzzle pieces and you can put them together, you're like, I got it now. Like I understand. Like, and you can start seeing like people, not everybody's a narcissist.
No.
That's just obvious,
Yeah.
not what it is.
Interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
So if it's not attachment and you're saying it's more like, okay, if someone was like the golden child, so then it would be like a learned behavior
It can.
that, yeah, that like impacts all of the other things.
Mhm.
Is that right? Or
Yeah, it is. And I think it's hard because we see it at that micro level of just the person. But one of the things I'm noticing now is we're seeing something called collective narcissism come into play. And we're seeing this a lot more politically. And I don't want to get into all of that. But
we
when
can if you want to.
I don't know too much about it, I've
Okay.
read like it, so I'm not gonna like say I'm the expert in it,
Okay.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
more along the lines of, right, collective narcissism is like associated with a tendency. I'm reading this directly from like the article, which is like the tendency to engage in and escalate intergroup conflicts. So they're starting to create conflicts, between things. We see this in politics, ethics, or ethnic or religious groups.
Like our president.
Yes, MAGA is actually the basis for that article, is they were looking at MAGA in terms of collective narcissism. Um,
Yeah, makes
we
sense.
also, yeah, we also see it with professional organizations, where, their product is the best and people become almost cult-like. I'm gonna say Apple is a good example of that, not like in a negative space, but it also points out like collective narcissism, like it's not narcissistic unless there's actual intergroup conflict.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm. Right? Where somebody with like their football team, they might be like going and like nudging another person on what they like, but they're not trying to like say my team is the best and you have to believe it, period.
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
So like, we start noticing, right, where collective narcissism starts to become abusive pretty recently, right? We're seeing that a lot, particularly my clients who are in the LGBTQIA plus communities and immigrant communities as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to see them come together, like where that antagonism that they're facing wasn't just coming from an individual, it's cultural, institutional, and sometimes systemic.
Mhm.
Um, that left me wondering, like, how do we as clinicians support someone who's being harmed, not just by a partner, but by a collective belief system that weaponizes shame and control?
Yeah, yeah. Let's get into that. If someone's listening to all of this
Mm-hmm.
and they're realizing
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what you said is just confirming some of my own thoughts that I've had for a very long time, but it's never been confirmed. And now I'm like, yup, check, check. I needed someone else's validation.
So
It's
that's a, I
okay, go
want
ahead.
to like validate you on that because a huge part of the abuse with narcissism is invalidation.
Mhm.
It is self-doubt. They are trying to create a space where you are doubting yourself. You are doubting your reality. You are doubting what is actually going on. I actually kind of coined this term of like the Cassandra complex, for
Yes, tell us
example.
about that. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm big into classical everything, but in the Trojan War, there is this prophetess, and she is this amazing prophetess, but she was given a curse, which is she's always going to be right, and no one's ever going to believe her.
Mhm.
And we see that so often with people who have experienced this, where it's like, am I crazy? Is anybody else seeing this? Like, I'm going out of my mind.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And that just like resonates with me so much. It hits home so much because that is literally how I have felt. I'm like, and I feel like the crazy one. I'm
Mhm.
like, how is nobody else seeing what I'm seeing? And also, just as like a side note, I want people to know Marcin is not a narcissist. My husband is
Oh,
not who
yeah.
I'm talking about. He is like far from that, just kind of like an FYI, no need for concern. I'm safe. And but
Mhm.
I do have people in my life where I'm like, yes, I have known that I never had the language for it, but there was
Mhm.
always this inner knowing.
Yeah.
And in those moments where I have felt crazy,
Mhm.
I always have to come back to myself and say, no, I need to stand in my truth. I need to reconnect with my inner knowing and I connect with my body and remember my experiences and remember like, no, I know that this is not okay and my experiences are real. And so I just thank you again for validating. And I'm sure this is going to resonate with so many other people too. So I would love to hear and let's really simplify this. Like, what are the
Yeah.
first three steps someone can do if they're listening to this episode and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, my family member is a narcissist, or my partner is a narcissist, or whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And they're kind of coming to this realization right now as they're listening. What
Mhm.
are the first three steps that they can do? Hey there, if you're looking for daily somatic practices to add to your toolbox, I'd love to introduce you to my somatic bundle where I guide you through over 30 somatic tools and practices that support your nervous system by creating the safety that your nervous system requires to move out of survival mode. Just click the link in the show notes and you will get immediate access to my library of tools. See you there.
Good question. And I think one of the first things is to stop and take an inventory of your body. When we start noticing these things, we are going to throw the narcissistic world out of whack because we are going to stop playing the games and we're going to stop doing that narcissistic supply that comes in. So the first thing you actually need to do is to stop, take a step back, and start being aware of like your own safety. Um, that I would say is an extreme examples, but unfortunately, when somebody who has this feels threatened, it becomes really scary. And it can become really dangerous really fast too.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you need to first off recognize what is happening in my body.
Yeah.
Um, do I know what danger feels like? Do I know what safety feels like? Because a lot of times those things have gone out of whack too. And that's oftentimes the first signal for us of like something isn't right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The second thing to do after checking in with your body, grounding yourself, being able to recognize that, is to make sure you're safe, right? Actually do like a safety plan, um, which is it safe if I'm in a relationship and I'm recognizing this and I want to get out? Is it actually safe for you to leave right now?
Yeah.
And that's a really sad thing to think about, but one of the main characteristics is isolating the person. And
Hmm.
so you might have lost contact with friends, with family, with who you are. And so there is a point of privilege in leaving.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we talk about that enough of like my ability to leave is very abnormal.
Hmm.
And it is an incredibly privileged place.
Hmm.
So for whatever reason, we might be staying. It might be because there are kids involved. It might be because even like immigration status comes into play and safety in general. A lot of the times because of that isolating, a lot of women might find themselves in a position of financially relying on that person
Yeah.
too.
Right. Right.
So, right, where a lot of people would say, "Oh, like just leave them." That's not always an option.
No.
That's gonna set them up for disaster,
Hmm.
actually, to just always expect that once somebody gets it, they're gonna leave. Actually, it is more likely that they're gonna like come back. That is the cycle of the narcissistic abuse too, is that
Hmm.
they do some, I'm gonna be honest here, like one of the hardest parts in narcissistic abuse is the vocabulary shift that you have to do because there is such a change that you have to understand and so many minute little things that you want to maybe have never heard before or it starts making sense and it is exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And are you talking about like uh like policing words and things like that? Like, is that what you're talking about? Or tell us a little bit more about what you mean.
Yeah. So I mean more like literally the vocabulary that we use in narcissistic abuse. So like there is this piece called future faking, which is somebody will say, I'm going to go see a therapist now, right? I'm going to go find somebody. And they never do
Yeah.
until it comes up again. And then they're going to find somebody. Oh, but there's this thing that's gone on. And then they never do, right?
Hmm.
It's this constant piece of, yeah, I'm going to change. And it never happening. That's that pervasive, recidivistic, maladaptive pattern coming back
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
too,
That makes sense.
right? And so that's one of those things called future faking. So when somebody maybe wants to talk with their partner and they're like, hey, I'm seeing these things, this is hard. Maybe we should go into couples counseling or something of that nature. Sometimes not the best idea.
Uh-huh.
When that comes on, you need to be very particular in who you're going to.
Hmm.
Not every therapist is created equal, and that includes like couples counselors. It is hard to work with personality disorders,
Yeah.
and not every one of them is going to see that. And unfortunately, in our community, um, I'm going to say fortunately and unfortunately, right? Fortunately, therapists hold a lot of hope for people to change.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we hold hope for change where there never is going to be.
Okay, so that leads me to one of my
Yeah.
questions. Um,
Hmm.
can someone who is a narcissist change? But before we go there, was there
Yeah.
a number three?
I'm like trying to think of like number three. So the third thing is actually reach out to someone else,
Yeah.
get a connection, build a support, meet for coffee, do something that is for you,
Hmm.
do something that's going to build your system and your network.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah.
Community is so important, especially when you may have felt like they've isolated you.
Mm.
Okay, so Yeah, thinking about whether or not narcissism is curable,
Mm,
like can someone are
there is treatment for narcissism, and the issue is that it oftentimes they won't go,
yeah,
right? Because if we look at it, there's nothing, there's no problem with them,
right,
right? In
right.
their mind, there is no reason that they would need to go. And when they're meeting with a therapist, say for anxiety, right, they might have 3 sessions and then they're like, okay, I'm cured, goodbye.
Mm,
hmm
okay.
Versus like these pervasive patterns. And I think that's really hard. There are instances where personality disorders are cured. And when we're talking specifically about this, where there's a lot of egocentricity, going to a therapist is going to include like a lot of shame and rage
Yeah.
too. And um, remember in grad school, one of the greatest things that one of my professors said was, you know, you're dealing with a narcissist in the room when they also think you're the greatest therapist of all time.
Interesting.
Because they would never go to see somebody if they weren't to the caliber that they would expect for
Oh,
themselves.
oh my gosh.
hmm
That is mind blowing.
hmm And my ex, when we were in couples counseling, he would constantly say something along the lines of like, you don't go to the gym when you're sick, so why would you go to couples counseling when you're not doing well?
Oh my gosh.
Of like, there had to be a reason that we were going that was good.
Right.
Mm,
Right. Hmm.
yeah.
Would you say that this is so on the more severe end,
hmm
it would be really hard to treat these symptoms or kind of like heal from these symptoms. But what about on the mild end? What are your thoughts on that?
They have to be able to tolerate a goal to change themselves in a non-manipulative way.
Yeah. Ugh, I
Right?
know.
That's the hard part, is that that is not a part of the diet. Like that's not a part of their personality. Um, there is change that can happen. So, say somebody has experienced significant trauma in their life, and the personality traits that came out of that were more narcissistic in nature. There is something called post-traumatic growth, which we can see a shift in the personality,
Mhm.
which is really helpful and I think really hopeful. And I think it's really hard because it means the person has to actually continue to go and go through hard treatment.
Yeah, so right, they need to have that willingness and that
Mm,
capacity to even tolerate that the hardness, the difficult part of healing.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
hmm
Unfortunate. It makes me sad in a
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's very sad because
yeah.
as I said, like as therapists, like we want to have hope. And I think that's why I like working with survivors the
Mhm.
most. Because I think I might get really beaten down if I had
Oh,
to
for
work
sure.
with NPD
Yeah,
consistently. Um,
1000%.
mhm,
Wow. My mind has been blown. I feel sad
mhm,
and I feel
mm,
validated
mhm.
and it's just unfortunate because again, going back to like what you were saying, like as therapists, we just hold so much hope. We want people to change. We have that empathy, we have compassion, and like we just,
Uh-huh.
I think like at the end of the day, we just want people to be happy. And it does truly break my heart that some people cannot change. Um,
Well, I think it's not that they cannot change, it's that they don't want to change.
yes, I thank you for that correction. Yes, you're right.
And And it's a really hard thing to kind of put that hope down, but it's something our clients need us to do because they need somebody in their life telling them this isn't going to change.
Yeah.
This is going to be how this is. There is nothing that you can do to change how they're acting.
Yeah.
That part of this is coming to a point of accepting
Yeah.
that this is the behavior that you're going to have to deal with.
Hmm.
And that's really difficult.
Yeah. I have another question before we
Go
go.
for it.
Can like someone's symptoms worsen as they get older? So maybe at one point in their lives, like let's say, I don't know, like teenage years or um, young adult years,
Mm,
could they have held narcissistic traits, but like they weren't as severe, and then as they got older, they got more severe? Is that possible?
that is possible, right? So, based off of stress hormones, how our bodies develop, increase in testosterone, we see that come in, like we were talking about before, that switch, right? So, it could be that something switches. And it's also important to note that Um, I always love the saying of like all children are little narcissists. So you're gonna see all of those traits in children, period. Like, congratulations. Like, if you have a teenager, you're gonna see it. That is a normal thing.
That's normal, right?
Just like, don't start pointing to children and being like, you're a narcissist. Yes, they are. They're all little narcissists. It's okay. We expect
That's
that.
part
That's
of their
developmentally
development.
appropriate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Then as they get older, maybe something like happens in their life that triggers um, or like it shifts something inside for them.
Mm-hmm. Or they were never given the opportunity to build up that ability. They were never given the opportunity to handle disappointment. They were never given the opportunity to handle shame. They were always told, you're doing great, good job, look how wonderful you are. And then they get older and they have to actually work on things
Yeah.
and they have no tolerance for that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hmm. Ugh,
Mhm.
I feel like I have so many more questions. Like I could
I
keep going on and
I
on and on,
know.
but I don't want to keep you forever. But I think that, we can always have you back,
Of
Candace.
course. I'd love
We
to be
can
back.
dive deeper into all of this. And you can also, I don't know if you're accepting any clients, but you could
Mm.
also reach out to Candace if she's available. And if you live in Massachusetts, are you licensed in any other state?
I am not licensed in any other state. I know, and this might be something to look out for. I'm trying to put together like a narcissistic abuse processing group as well. Just because when we've gone through that as survivors, it is so important to be able to co-regulate and get out of that isolation. I know one place that people can go, and a lot of people have found it to be helpful, is the Romani network as well. And
Okay,
she does a great job, and there's a lot of good information that she brings out
great.
as well.
And that's available for like anyone, anywhere.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly. So that's why I wanted to like put that out.
good.
And I think keeping on that piece of paying attention to your nervous system.
Hmm.
I have I would say like go online and look at me. No, you have to be very careful of what might be triggering in these circumstances and what you can handle.
Yeah,
Like there was a point where my feed was all narcissistic abuse, like shorts and reels, and I had to stop because
totally. Yeah,
it's exhausting.
yeah, you can get consumed by it.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you
Yeah.
send me that link so that I can add it to the
Yes.
show notes and then everybody can have access to it? Also,
Yes.
if you are in Massachusetts and you're listening to this, Candace, can you tell us a little bit about your services, what you're currently offering, if you have space for any new clients, and how people can connect with you?
Yeah, so I am in Beverly, Massachusetts, which is like the North Shore. My focus is on complex PTSD and narcissistic abuse. I am currently going to be doing a second cohort of a group of mine on a complex PTSD support group. It's not really a support group, it's actually more of a co-regulation group. It is learning how to co-regulate after CPTSD because that is something that is really impacted
I
as well.
love that. I love
Mhm.
that. And how can they connect with you?
And you can find me online. My website is cdcounseling.org.
Okay.
And that's where if you're looking for the groups, I'm going to be posting it there. Yeah.
Amazing. And I will add all of that into the show notes.
Cool.
Candace, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. This conversation was everything. I feel like I needed this for myself. I already shared that, but thank you. And maybe we'll have you back on the podcast.
Definitely. I'd love to be back.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you absolutely loved this episode, I would so appreciate it if you subscribed and left a review on Apple Podcast, or take a screenshot and share this episode on social media. The more nervous systems we reach, the more generational cycles we break, and the more we contribute to a kinder and safer world. And if you're looking for somatic healing services, send me a DM and I'd love to chat on how I can support you. I'll see you in the next episode.